The galaxy had rules. Every civilization that had ever reached the stars had learned those rules the hard way. You could bend physics a little, stretch it, push it, find the cracks in the walls of what was possible, but you could never truly break it. The universe had limits. Hard limits. Lines that no amount of technology, no amount of intelligence, no amount of desperation could cross. Every civilization knew this. Every civilization except one. The galactic consensus had been watching humanity for 300 years. Not out of fear. Not at first. At first, it had been mild curiosity, the kind of detached, almost bored observation that older species directed toward younger ones. Humans were interesting the way a clever animal was interesting. Resourceful. Stubborn. Occasionally surprising. But not dangerous. Not yet. The consensus was made up of 47 species. The oldest of them, the Velshera, had been traveling between stars for over 12,000 years. The youngest, the Dothiki, had achieved faster-than-light travel just 8 centuries ago. Every member of the consensus had gone through the same progression, the same slow, painful climb from primitive technology to the stars, guided by the same fundamental understanding of physics, the same hard walls of what was and was not possible. They had all hit those walls. They had all learned to work within them. And then they had watched humanity crash headfirst into those same walls, and somehow come out the other side. Admiral Chinwei stood on the bridge of the unyielding resolve and stared at the star map displayed in front of her. She was 53 years old, with short silver hair cut close to her head and dark eyes that had seen more than most people would ever see in 3 lifetimes. She had commanded 7 ships before this one. She had fought in 4 wars. She had watched friends die in the cold silence of space, had held the hands of dying crew members, had made decisions that still woke her up at 3 in the morning with her heart hammering in her chest. None of that had prepared her for this. "Run the diagnostics again," she said. Lieutenant Commander Yara Osei looked up from her station. She was 31, brilliant, and currently wearing an expression that suggested she had been running diagnostics for the past 6 hours and was beginning to question her life choices. "Admiral, I've run them 14 times. The results are the same every time." "Run them again." Yara ran them again. The results were the same. Chinwei stared at the numbers and tried to make them make sense. She had a doctorate in quantum mechanics. She had spent 20 years studying the theoretical limits of propulsion technology. She had read every paper ever written on the subject of faster-than-light travel, every crackpot theory and every serious academic study, every wild-eyed proposal and every cold-eyed dismissal. What the diagnostics were telling her was impossible. Not difficult. Not unprecedented. Not ambitious. Impossible. "Ma'am," said Commander David Park, her executive officer, stepping up beside her. He was a quiet man, methodical, the kind of person who made lists and checked them twice and never got rattled. He looked rattled. "The shipyard team is on the comm. They want to know if we've completed our initial assessment. Tell them we're still working on it. They've been waiting for 2 hours. Tell them to keep waiting." David hesitated. "Admiral, they built this ship. They already know what it can do." "I know what they know it can do," Chinwei said. "I want to know what it actually does. There's a difference." She turned back to the star map. "Because what it actually does should not be possible." The ship was called the Erebus. It had no official designation yet beyond that name. No fleet registry number, no formal classification, because the classification system that humanity used to categorize its warships did not have a category for what the Erebus was. Creating that category would have required either rewriting the classification system or acknowledging, officially and in writing, that humanity had built something that broke the laws of physics. Nobody in the Admiralty wanted to do either of those things yet. The Erebus was 4.2 kilometers long. That alone would have made it remarkable. The largest warship in humanity's current fleet was the Fortress of Dawn, at 2.8 kilometers. Building something larger was a feat of engineering, certainly, but it was an understandable feat. You gathered more materials, you built larger fabrication platforms, you threw more resources at the problem. Size was just a matter of will and money. But size was not what made the Erebus impossible. What made the Erebus impossible was what was inside it. Or rather, what was simultaneously inside it and not inside it. What existed in a state that the engineers who had built it described, with increasing frustration, as both present and not present, depending on what you're trying to hit it with. What occupied a space in normal physics while also occupying a parallel space in quantum probability, a space that was, according to every model of the universe that humanity had ever developed, not supposed to be accessible to a physical object larger than a subatomic particle. The Erebus was quantum locked. It existed in a superposition of states. It was real and it was not real. It was here and it was elsewhere. It was solid matter and it was a probability wave. And it maintained this state not for a fraction of a second, as quantum superposition normally lasted before the universe insisted on resolving it, but continuously, indefinitely for as long as its power systems ran. The engineers called it the quantum lock. They had been trying to achieve it for 40 years. They had succeeded 18 months ago. They were still not entirely sure how. It's like, one of the lead engineers, Dr. Sophia Marsh, had told Chinwei during the briefing, pushing her glasses up her nose and waving her hands in a way that suggested she was trying to describe something that didn't have good words yet. Okay, you know how in quantum mechanics, particles can exist in superposition? Multiple states at once? And then when you observe them, the wave function collapses and they settle into one state. Yes, Chinwei had said. The Erebus doesn't do that last part. Chinwei had stared at her. The wave function doesn't collapse? We built a system that prevents the collapse. We call it the quantum anchor. It generates a field around the ship that, well, it basically convinces the universe that no observation is taking place. So the ship maintains superposition even at macroscopic scale. Sophia had paused. In theory, this should be impossible. Quantum decoherence at this scale should be instantaneous and irreversible. But we found a way to sustain coherence and the ship does it, so apparently it's possible after all. What does this mean practically? Sophia had smiled, and it had been the smile of someone who knew they were about to say something that would break somebody's brain. It means that when something tries to hit the Erebus, it has a 50% chance of passing right through it. Because at the moment of impact, there's a 50% probability that the ship is simply not there. In the location being hit. In the physical sense. Chinwei had sat with that for a long moment. A 50% chance, she had repeated. On average, we can bias the probability with the anchor systems. In full defensive mode, we can push it closer to 70-30. The ship is only physically present in normal space about 30% of the time. The rest of the time it's... Sophia had waved her hands again. Elsewhere. But also here. But not in a way that solid objects can interact with. And weapons. The weapons systems fire from quantum superposition. The projectiles or energy beams exist in superposition until they make contact with a target. At the moment of contact, we collapse their wave function. We force them back into definite physical reality, right at the point of impact. So they hit the target with full physical force. Sophia had paused again. There is no known defense against this. A weapon that doesn't physically exist until it's already inside your hull is a weapon that your shields cannot stop. Chinwei had looked at the star map for a very long time after that briefing. Now she stood on the bridge of that impossible ship and watched the diagnostics confirm for the 15th time that the Erebus did exactly what Sophia had said it did. The consensus is going to lose their minds, David said quietly, standing beside her. That's the optimistic outcome, Chinwei said. The pessimistic outcome is that they try to destroy it before we can use it. David glanced at her. Do you think they've detected it? They detect everything. Chinwei turned away from the star map. The question is whether they understand what they're detecting. And right now I guess the answer is no. Because if they understood it, we'd already have a message on our comm system asking us, very politely and with considerable diplomatic language, to please explain how in the name of every known law of physics we built this ship. As if on cue, Lieutenant Torres at the communication station looked up. Admiral, he said. We have an incoming transmission. From the Consensus Central Council. Chinwei and David looked at each other. They want to know, Torres continued, reading from his screen with an expression of someone trying not to smile, and I'm quoting directly here, they want to know if we can please explain the anomalous sensor readings being generated by the vessel currently registered as the US Erebus, which appear to be inconsistent with any known physical process and are causing significant concern among the Consensus Science Council, 3 of whose members have reportedly requested emergency counseling. There was a brief silence on the bridge. Then, despite everything, Chinwei laughed. It was a short laugh, dry and tired, but real. She turned back to the star map and looked at the stars spread out before her, the thousands of inhabited systems, the dozens of Consensus member worlds, the territories that humanity had spent 3 centuries trying to earn a place in, and she thought about what it meant that 3 alien scientists had needed counseling because of her ship's sensor readings. Send them a reply, she said. Tell them we'll be happy to discuss the Erebus at the upcoming Consensus Assembly. Tell them we look forward to the conversation. She paused. And tell them the counseling is probably a good idea. They're going to need it. The Consensus Central Council met on the station called Harmony. Harmony was not a warship. It was not a military installation. It had been built 1,200 years ago as a deliberate statement of peaceful intent. A neutral ground where species who might otherwise be shooting at each other could sit in the same room and use words instead. It was enormous, 300 kilometers long, and it was beautiful in the way that things built by committee over 1,000 years by dozens of different species are sometimes accidentally beautiful, chaotic and strange and full of architectural choices that made no sense from any single cultural perspective but somehow, together, created something that felt like the physical manifestation of the idea that different things could coexist. Ambassador Rachel Torres had lived on Harmony for 11 years. She was 60 years old, with brown skin and gray-streaked hair and a reputation for being the most patient person in the entire human diplomatic corps. She had negotiated 7 trade agreements, 3 border disputes, 1 near war, and 1 actual small war that she had managed to end after only 4 months. She had sat across tables from species who breathed ammonia, species who communicated in ultrasound, species who had no concept of individual identity and found the human insistence on personal names deeply confusing, and species who had tried to eat her on 2 separate occasions, both of which she had handled with remarkable composure. She was not currently feeling remarkable composure. She was currently sitting in the anteroom outside the council chamber, reading the briefing documents that had been transmitted to her by Admiral Chinwei, and feeling the particular cold sensation that came when you understood, very clearly, that the situation was about to become much more complicated than anyone was prepared for. Her aide, a young man named Marcus Webb, appeared in the doorway. "Ambassador, the council is ready for you. Tell me the lineup." "Full council. All 47 member species." Marcus hesitated. "And the Science Council has sent 3 observers." "Ambassador, all 3 of them are," the briefing document says, "visibly distressed." Rachel set down the briefing document. "How visibly?" "One of them, the Velshera representative, is apparently sitting in the corner making a sound that their cultural attaché described as the harmonic of deep cosmological anxiety." Rachel took a slow breath. "Right." She stood up, smoothed her jacket and picked up her briefing case. "Let's go break some more things." The council chamber was a vast circular room with 47 seats arranged in a perfect ring around a central floor, where the speaker stood. Each seat was customized for the species that occupied it. Different atmospheres contained in transparent barriers, different gravity levels, different light spectra. The room smelled, to Rachel's human nose, like a combination of ozone, something floral, something that reminded her unpleasantly of overripe fruit, and the sharp chemical tang of Dothiki air filtration. She walked to the center of the floor and stood there, feeling the weight of 47 species looking at her. Grand Counselor Velshan, the Velshera representative who held the rotating chairmanship this cycle, leaned forward from the highest point of the ring. The Velshera were tall, thin, pale blue beings with large dark eyes and 4 arms that moved with a slow, deliberate grace. Velshan was approximately 400 years old and had the particular stillness of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall and had learned to take the long view of things. Right now the long view appeared to be troubling. "Ambassador Torres," Velshan said in the precise, formal consensus standard that all council sessions used. "Thank you for appearing before the council on such short notice. We will dispense with the usual preamble. You have received the documents we transmitted. You understand the nature of our concern." "I do," Rachel said. "Then you understand that what your species appears to have constructed represents a challenge not merely to the current political order of the consensus, but to the foundational physical laws upon which all of our scientific understanding is built. I understand that is how it appears from the outside." A soft murmur moved around the ring. Velshan's 4 arms shifted slightly, a gesture that Rachel had learned over 11 years, meant something between displeasure and resignation. "Ambassador, our instruments have been analyzing the sensor data from the Erebus for 36 hours. We have consulted with scientists from 23 member species. The consensus, if you will forgive the pun, is that what your ship is doing should not be possible. And yet it is doing it. We would like an explanation." Rachel had been waiting for this moment. She had been thinking, since she'd read Chinwei's briefing, about how to frame what humanity had done in a way that didn't cause panic. She had decided in the end that there was no such framing. The truth was going to cause panic regardless of how it was presented. The best she could do was present it calmly and try to manage the fallout. "The Erebus," she said, "is a quantum-locked warship. It maintains macroscopic quantum superposition through a technology we call the quantum anchor. In practical terms, this means the ship exists simultaneously in normal physical space and in quantum probability space. It cannot be reliably detected. It cannot be reliably targeted. Its weapons systems deliver force from within quantum superposition, bypassing conventional shielding. We believe it represents a significant advance over any currently deployed military technology. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that had texture. It was thick and heavy and full of things that hadn't been said yet. Then the Dothiki representative, a broad, gray-skinned being named Hask, spoke. The Dothiki were known for being blunt. "You built a ship that breaks physics," Hask said. "Not a question. We built a ship that operates in a regime of physics that was previously believed to be inaccessible at macroscopic scale," Rachel replied. "We didn't break physics. We found a door that nobody knew was there." "A door?" Velshan repeated. The harmonic undertone of their voice suggested this word choice was not going over well. "Ambassador. With respect. What you are describing is not a door. What you are describing is a weapon capable of destroying any ship in any fleet currently operated by any member of this consensus, against which no currently existing defensive system offers any meaningful protection. And you are describing it as a door." "I'm describing the technology," Rachel said. "The application of the technology is a separate conversation." "Is it?" This came from a smaller figure in the ring, the representative of the Keth, a species known for their mathematical precision and their tendency to skip social niceties in favor of direct logical statements. The Keth representative's name was Zoe, and they were currently radiating the kind of tight, controlled agitation that, for a Keth, was the equivalent of screaming. "Ambassador Torres. Let us be precise. Your species has, without informing the consensus, without submitting to the technology review process mandated by the Harmonic Accord of 2847, constructed a weapon system so advanced that our current defense architecture is entirely insufficient to counter it. You have presented this to us as a fait accompli. You are asking us to have a conversation about application. But the application at this point is at your discretion entirely. You have built something that can destroy us and you are smiling and you are talking about doors." Rachel kept her face neutral with some effort. The Harmonic Accord of 2847 mandates review of weapons technology developed for deployment within consensus space. The Erebus was developed in human space at a classified facility and has not yet been deployed anywhere. "A technicality," Zoe said. "A legal distinction," Rachel replied. "One that humanity maintains is valid. But I take your point about the spirit of the Accord, and I want to assure the Council that humanity's intentions regarding the Erebus are—" "Humanity's intentions," interrupted the representative of the Grath, a massive, armored species who communicated in deep subsonic rumbles translated by their ambassador's comm system, "are exactly what concerns us, Ambassador. We have had 3 centuries of watching your species. 3 centuries of watching you take what seemed like small steps in technology and produce, consistently, results that significantly exceeded our projections. We should have adjusted our projections. We did not. We believed your species was following the same arc that all species follow. We believed that the hard walls of physics would slow you the same way they slowed us. We were wrong. And now we are sitting here looking at what being wrong has produced, and we are trying to decide what to do about it." The room had gotten very quiet. Rachel stood in the center of it and let the quiet sit for a moment because she had learned, in 40 years of diplomacy, that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was let people finish being afraid before you started talking. Then she said very calmly, "The Erebus was built because humanity needs it." That got their attention. "In the past 15 years, she continued, "for human colony ships have disappeared in the outer reach. 3 human mining stations have been destroyed, the official cause listed as mechanical failure, but the black box data from 2 of them indicated weapons fire before the recording stopped. Last year, a human diplomatic vessel carrying 9 crew members and 2 ambassadors failed to arrive at its destination. We found the debris field 6 months later. The weapons signatures on the wreckage did not match any human weapons system." She let that land. "We have been patient. We have brought these incidents to this council. We have asked for investigations. We have received what I will charitably describe as inadequate responses. So yes, we built the Erebus. We built it because someone in this galaxy is killing our people and nobody here seems particularly interested in stopping them. And we built it to make very clear that if that continues, whoever is doing it will not find us easy targets." Another silence. A different kind this time. Velshan's 4 arms moved through a complex pattern that Rachel recognized as the Velshera equivalent of a deep sigh. "Ambassador. The Council is aware of the incidents you are referencing. The investigations are ongoing." "For 15 years," Rachel said. "They've been ongoing for 15 years. These things take time. 9 crew members, Rachel said. 2 ambassadors. Debris in an empty sector of space. That is not a technical problem that takes 15 years to investigate. That is a political problem that 15 years has not been enough to solve. She looked around the ring, at 47 species, all of them more powerful than humanity had been just a century ago, all of them watching her with expressions that ranged from discomfort to fear to something she couldn't quite read. Humanity is not here to threaten anyone. We are here because we belong here. We have earned our place in this galaxy the same way every species here has earned theirs, through effort and sacrifice and loss. The Erebus exists not to start a war, but to make very clear what the cost of starting one with us would be. She picked up her briefing case. We will be happy to discuss the technology further at the Council's convenience. We will be transparent about its capabilities and its limitations. We will engage with any legitimate legal concerns about the Harmonic Accord. What we will not do is apologize for defending ourselves. She paused at the edge of the speaker's floor. And I would suggest that the Council use the time between now and our next meeting to think very seriously about those 15-year-old investigations. Because the Erebus is one ship. But the shipyard that built it is still running. She walked out. Behind her, the council chamber erupted into 47 different species making 47 different sounds that all meant variations of the same thing. In the anteroom, Marcus was waiting for her with wide eyes. How did it go? About as expected, Rachel said. Get me a secure channel to Admiral Chinwei. And make me some coffee. Very strong coffee. Should I be worried? Rachel thought about the look on Velshan's face when she'd said the shipyard is still running. She thought about the Keth representative's controlled agitation. She thought about the Gratha's subsonic rumble, which her translator had rendered as words but which she had felt in her chest as something more like a threat assessment. Yes, she said. But not yet. The message came at 0300 hours station time. Rachel was asleep, or trying to be, when her secure comm chimed with the specific 3-tone sequence that meant priority 1. She was out of bed and at her desk in under 30 seconds, a habit built over 4 decades of being woken up at inconvenient times with inconvenient information. The message was from an encrypted source. The encryption was good, better than good, actually sophisticated enough that her system took 40 seconds to crack it, which was 40 seconds longer than it usually took. When the content came through, it was a single set of coordinates and a single sentence. If you want to know who is killing your people, come alone. Rachel stared at the message for a long time. Then she called Marcus. Get me a shuttle, she said when he answered, sounding like he'd also been asleep. Ambassador, it's 3 in the morning. I know. Get me a shuttle. Where are you going? She read him the coordinates. There was a pause. That's in the drift. The unmapped section. Ambassador, that's. I know what it is. Get me a shuttle. And Marcus, don't tell anyone where I'm going. Not yet. She could hear him deciding whether to argue with her. He had worked with her long enough to know she had made her decision. I'll have it ready in 20 minutes, he said. But I'm logging the coordinates with a 48-hour delay release. If you're not back in 48 hours, the whole council gets them. That's fine, Rachel said. That's smart. She dressed in the dark, tucked a small sidearm into her jacket. She had carried one since the day a Velshera separatist group had tried to make a political statement using her as the message, and went to get her shuttle. The drift was what navigators called the unmapped region between the consensus's outer border and the areas of space that nobody had gotten around to claiming yet. It wasn't empty, space was never truly empty, but it was sparse, poorly charted, and regularly used by people who didn't want to be found. Pirates operated there. Smugglers. Rogue prospectors. And, apparently, whoever had sent Rachel a message in the middle of the night. The coordinates led her to an asteroid field. A large one, the remains of what had once been a gas giant before something had torn it apart, probably a collision several billion years ago. The rocks ranged in size from pebbles to small moons, and they were dense enough to make navigation genuinely tricky, which was probably why someone had chosen this location. Her shuttle's sensors picked up the other ship when she was still 3 minutes out. It was small, smaller than her shuttle actually, and it was broadcasting no identification signal. When she hailed it, there was a long pause before the response came. Ambassador Torres. The voice was synthesized, run through a scrambler to hide its origin. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, Rachel said. Who are you? Someone who has been trying to get this information to you for a long time. Someone who has been prevented. Pause. I am a member of the consensus. I will not tell you which species. What I will tell you is that what I am about to share with you will be dangerous for both of us, and I need your word that you will protect my identity. I can't promise that without knowing what you're giving me. Then let me give you the first piece. A test if you like. A data file transferred to her shuttle. The colony ship Helena. Disappeared 4 years ago. 112 colonists. You were told the investigation found no evidence of hostile action. That's what the report said. The report was falsified. Another pause. Open the file. Rachel opened it. The file contained sensor logs. Raw, unprocessed sensor logs from a consensus monitoring buoy, the kind that was scattered throughout the drift, recording everything that passed through its range and uploading to the central network. These logs had not been in the official investigation report. They showed, clearly and unambiguously, the Helena encountering another vessel, a vessel of a configuration that Rachel's system identified with a cold lurch in her stomach. Tharkan configuration. The Tharkan were not members of the consensus. They were a species that occupied a region of space adjacent to the drift, powerful, isolationist, and officially neutral in all consensus matters. They had been on the fringes of galactic politics for as long as the consensus had existed. They traded occasionally. They communicated rarely. They were considered, by the diplomatic community, to be one of those species that had simply decided they preferred to be left alone, and were left alone accordingly. The sensor logs showed a Tharkan vessel approaching the Helena. They showed weapons fire. They showed the Helena ceasing to appear on sensors. The Tharkan, Rachel said. Not a question. Not officially, the voice said. Not sanctioned by the Tharkan government, or at least not provably sanctioned. What I believe you are dealing with is a faction. A splinter group within the Tharkan military command that has decided humanity's expansion in the outer reach represents a threat to Tharkan interests. They have been removing that threat quietly for 15 years. Targeting vessels that are isolated, far from witnesses, in areas where the evidence can be made to disappear. And the consensus knows? A long silence. Some within the consensus know. Some have chosen not to investigate too closely because the Tharkan are useful. They occupy a buffer zone between consensus space and the outer reach that serves certain strategic interests. Some have chosen not to look because looking would require action, and action requires consensus, and consensus among 47 species on a question involving a powerful non-member state is. The voice trailed off. Complicated, Rachel said. Deeply complicated. Yes. Rachel stared at the sensor logs. 112 colonists. Families. Children. Gone, and the report had said no evidence of hostile action. Someone had looked at those logs and written those words and filed that report and gone home at the end of the day. She felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. How many incidents, she said. That I can confirm? 7. That I suspect? Closer to 12. And you're telling me this now because the Arabish changed things, the voice said. When your ship appeared and the Science Council started having its crisis, certain conversations began happening in places they shouldn't have been. I have intercepted communications between the Tharkan faction and at least 2 consensus member states. They are discussing preemptive action against the Erebus before it can be deployed. They are discussing what they describe as removing the threat before humanity understands it has been created. Rachel's hands had gone very still on the shuttle controls. They want to destroy the Erebus, she said. They want to destroy the Erebus and its crew and the shipyard that built it and, I believe, the admiral in command of it. They want to do this quickly before the political situation catches up with them. And they have, I believe, the assets in place to attempt it. You said 2 consensus member states. Which ones? I cannot tell you that yet. I do not have enough proof for it to survive the Council's legal process. What I have is enough for you to warn Admiral Chinwei. Enough for her to be ready. Enough for, the voice broke off. Rachel's sensors spiked. Multiple contacts incoming, moving fast. Not her shuttle. Not the small ship she'd been talking to. Something bigger. Several somethings. They found you, the voice said, and for the first time it had something that sounded, even through the scrambler, like fear. Go. Ambassador, go now. Don't come back for this location. I will contact you again when... The channel went dead. On Rachel's sensors, 3 vessels had appeared. Large ones. The configuration her system showed her made her breath stop for a half-second. Not Tharkan. Consensus registered. But the weapon signatures powering up on those 3 vessels were not standard consensus armament. They were military-grade. Warship-grade. And they were targeting the small ship she'd been talking to. Rachel made a decision in under a second. She punched her shuttle's engines to maximum and changed course, not away from the three vessels but toward them, broadcasting her identification signal at full power. "This is Ambassador Rachel Torres of the United Earth Government," she said, on every frequency she could hit simultaneously. "You are in the presence of a diplomatic vessel. Under Article 7 of the Harmonic Accord, I am placing this entire area under diplomatic hold. Any weapons discharge in this zone is an act of war against Earth. Stand down immediately and identify yourselves." There was a moment of hesitation, the moment she'd been counting on. Nobody shot a diplomat. Even people doing terrible, secret things did not shoot a diplomat, because shooting a diplomat was the one act that was guaranteed to bring everything out into the open in the worst possible way. The three vessels did not fire. They also did not identify themselves. On her sensors she watched them withdraw, quickly, cleanly, like they had practiced it. In less than a minute they were gone, back into the drift, their identification signals still dark. The small ship was still there. "Are you all right?" Rachel called on the channel. "Static." Then, "Yes." The voice sounded shaken, the scrambler's synthetic flatness cracking around the edges of real emotion. I didn't expect that. I've been doing this a long time," Rachel said. "Get out of here. Use a different route. And when you contact me again, soon please, bring me those names." She turned her shuttle back toward Harmony. Her hands were perfectly steady on the controls. She had learned a long time ago to save the shaking for after. Admiral Chinwei received Rachel's message in the early morning hours, while the Erebus was running quiet in the shipyard berth, and she sat with it for a long time in her cabin before she called her command staff together. They gathered in the small briefing room off the main bridge, 7 people who represented the core command of the most unusual warship in human history. Chinwei looked at their faces and thought about what she was going to ask of them. "Someone wants to destroy this ship," she said without preamble. "And they have assets in position to try. I want operational security shifted to level 4 immediately, effective now. I want our departure from the shipyard moved up. How far can we push the timeline, Lieutenant Commander?" Yara Osei pulled up her tablet. "The quantum drive systems are at 92% operational. We were planning another 3 weeks of integration testing before. Can we deploy at 92%? Yara's expression said she didn't like the question. "Technically. We lose some response time on the probability modulation. The ship's ability to adjust the superposition bias in real time would be slower than optimal. Maybe 30% slower." "What does that mean in combat terms?" "Instead of being able to go from 30% present to 70% present in 2 seconds, it takes closer to 6 seconds. She paused. "In most scenarios, not a significant difference. In a very fast engagement, possibly critical." "What else?" "The quantum torpedo targeting systems haven't been fully calibrated. We'd be operating at about 80% accuracy instead of 97. Real-world translation? We miss more." Chinwei nodded. "Every other system? Fully operational. Conventional weapons, shields, propulsion, life support, communications, all at 100%. The quantum systems are the ones still being finalized." "All right." Chinwei looked around the table. "Here's what I know and what I suspect. I know that a Tharkan faction has been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of our people over 15 years. I suspect that faction has allies inside the consensus who helped them cover it up. I know they are now aware that we know, or will know soon, and that they believe the Erebus changes the tactical equation in a way they find unacceptable. And I know they have ships in the area with the capability and apparently the intent to attack us." She paused, letting the weight of it settle. "What I don't know is when they'll move, or exactly how many ships they have, or whether their allies in the consensus will provide them additional support." She looked at her weapons officer, Lieutenant Commander James Cole, a tall, lean man with a quiet intensity that she had always found reassuring. "James, if we're attacked in the shipyard berth, what's our situation?" James had clearly been thinking about this already. "Bad," he said without softening it. "The quantum lock isn't useful in the berth. We're physically connected to the shipyard infrastructure. We'd have to disconnect before we could activate the quantum anchor, and that takes 4 minutes minimum. If they hit us in the first 4 minutes, we're fighting as a conventional ship. A very large conventional ship with very good conventional weapons, but still, conventional. And once we're disconnected? Then we're the Erebus," James said, and something shifted in his expression. Not pride exactly, but something close to it. "And I'd take this ship against anything they can put in front of us. I need better than anything," Chinwei said. "I need to know what they actually have." We don't have confirmed intelligence on Tharkan military assets in the area, her intelligence officer, Major Priya Singh, said. What I can tell you is what we know about Tharkan warship capabilities in general. Their standard fleet composition is built around what they call void cutters, fast, maneuverable, medium-sized vessels. Strong offensive capabilities, lighter armor than our equivalents. The main threat is their speed. They can reposition faster than anything in the current consensus fleet. Faster than the Erebus? In conventional propulsion? Yes. Priya paused. But the Erebus doesn't fight conventionally. No, Chenwei agreed. It doesn't. She looked around the table again. Here's what we are going to do. We're going to accelerate our departure timeline to 48 hours. I want every system that can be finalized in 48 hours finalized. Everything that can't be finalized gets the best state it can reach. We leave the shipyard in 2 days and we find open space where the quantum anchor can actually be useful. She paused. We are not going to sit in this berth and wait for someone to try to kill us. And then? David Park asked. And then we find out who those ships were that went after Ambassador Torres. And we find out what happened to our people. She let the weight of 15 years settle into the room. And we make sure it doesn't happen to any more. The next 48 hours were organized chaos. The engineering teams who had been promised 3 more weeks, were told they had 2 days. There was a great deal of profanity, some genuine despair, and then, because this was a human crew working on a project they had collectively poured years of their lives into, a remarkable rally. People worked 20-hour shifts. Dr. Sophia Marsh was seen at her console for 31 consecutive hours, sleeping for 4, and returning looking exactly as tired as someone who had slept for 4 hours should look. The quantum drive integration pushed from 92 to 96%. The torpedo targeting calibration reached 89%. 3 separate ancillary systems that had been listed as, will complete in 2 weeks, were completed in 30 hours. Chenwei walked the ship during those 48 hours. Not giving orders, the department heads had their orders. She walked because she had learned, commanding ships for 20 years, that there were things a commander could do with their presence that couldn't be done with orders. When the crew saw their admiral in the corridors at 0200 hours checking on things being present, it said something that no speech or memo could say. It said, I am here. This matters. You matter. She stopped at every station. She remembered names. She asked about the work, not in a performative way but because she genuinely wanted to understand every piece of this ship that her crew was building. On the 3rd stop of her first circuit, she found a young ensign named Danny Reeves sitting in a maintenance crawlway with a quantum relay component in his hands, staring at it with the expression of someone who had been staring at the same problem for too long. Ensign Reeves, she said. He startled badly and nearly dropped the component. Admiral. I'm sorry, What's the problem? He looked at the component, then at her. He was probably 22, with the kind of face that still had youth in it despite the exhaustion around his eyes. The relay coupling won't seat properly. I've tried 6 configurations. The specifications say it should work, but there's a thermal expansion issue that the specs didn't account for, and when the coupling heats up it misaligns by about 0.3 mm and what happens at 0.3 mm misalignment? It causes a signal degradation in the quantum coherence monitoring system. About 4%. Under normal operation not significant. But if the ship goes into active quantum engagement, 4% monitoring degradation could delay the anchor system's response by up to 2 seconds. 2 seconds. In James Cole's analysis of the combat implications, 2 seconds could be the difference between the Erebus successfully phasing out of a weapons hit and taking it full on. What have you tried? She said, and sat down on the floor of the corridor because this conversation was going to be worth having properly. Danny blinked at her. Then he set the component down between them and started talking. It took 40 minutes. At the end of it they had a solution, not elegant but functional. Danny had been approaching the problem from one direction. Chenwei's background in quantum drive theory, a field she hadn't worked in directly for 15 years but hadn't entirely forgotten, came at it from another angle. The solution lived in the intersection. That'll work, Danny said, holding up the reassembled coupling and examining it. There was something quietly electric in his expression, the particular light of a problem solved. Ma'am, that'll actually work. Good. Chenwei stood, brushing dust off her uniform. Get it installed. And write up the solution and send it to Dr. Marsh. We may have the same issue in other relays. She started to walk away. Admiral. Danny's voice caught her. She turned. He looked like he was deciding whether to say something and then he said it. The crew, everyone here, we know what's at stake. We know someone wants to stop this ship from ever being used. He stopped. We just want you to know that we're ready. Whatever happens. Chinwei looked at him for a moment. 22 years old, sitting in a maintenance crawlway in the small hours of the morning, working on a ship that the laws of physics had told everyone couldn't exist. I know, she said. HFY, from this moment on, that's exactly what I'm counting on. They departed the shipyard 4 hours ahead of even the accelerated schedule. The Erebus cleared the berth with systems at 98%, better than anyone had projected, and moved into open space with the quiet confidence of something that did not entirely belong to the normal universe and knew it. Chinwei stood on the bridge and watched the shipyard fall away behind them. She thought about Danny Reeves and his relay coupling. She thought about Sophia Marsh and her 31-hour shift. She thought about 700 crew members who had worked miracles because they understood what the miracles were for. Quantum anchor, she said. Activate. The lights on the bridge shifted subtly, a slight blurring at the edges of everything, a brief sensation like the air was thicker than it should be, and then a settling. The diagnostics showed green across the board. The Erebus slipped sideways into its superposition state, existing in both normal space and quantum probability space simultaneously, half real and half possibility, and began its journey into the unknown. Behind them, sensors registered 3 fast-moving ships departing the drift region. On an intercept course. We have company, James Cole said from the weapons station, his voice calm and precise and ready. 3 vessels. Tharkin Void Cutter configuration. They were waiting. How long to intercept? At their current speed 6 hours. If they push their drives, 4 hours 30 minutes. Chinwei leaned back in her command chair. Let them come, she said. We're not running. She looked at the main display where 3 small dots were moving toward the massive, shimmering half-real signature of the Erebus. And let's find out what happens when someone tries to kill a ship that isn't entirely there. They came in at 0614 hours. 3 Tharkin Void Cutters, moving in a formation that Chinwei recognized immediately, a classic envelopment pattern designed to catch a target between 3 vectors of fire. It was a good tactic. Against a conventional ship, it was nearly unbeatable. You couldn't defend all 3 approach angles simultaneously, so no matter which way you turned, you were presenting an unshielded side to at least one attacker. Chinwei watched the formation develop on the tactical display and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. She felt calm. Not the forced calm of someone suppressing fear. Not the blank calm of someone in shock. The real, settled calm of a commander who has assessed the situation, understands it completely, and knows exactly what they're going to do about it. James, she said. Target all 3 simultaneously. James Cole's hands were already moving. Targeting solutions locked. Quantum torpedoes ready, 6 tubes loaded. Standard shields. Raised. Though given the quantum anchor status. He glanced at the probability display. We're sitting at 62% present in normal space. Their weapons have a 38% chance of passing through us harmlessly. Don't get comfortable with that, Chinwei said. 38% doesn't help the crew member who gets hit by the 62% shot. Understood. The Tharkin ships opened fire at maximum range. This was unusual. Most tacticians preferred to close the distance before engaging to improve accuracy. Opening fire at maximum range was either desperation or an attempt to overwhelm with volume. Chinwei watched the incoming fire streams on the display and chose a third interpretation. They were testing. They were firing from maximum range because they wanted to see what happened when their weapons hit the Erebus, before they committed to close engagement. Smart. On the tactical display, the incoming fire streams spread across the Erebus's position. Several struck home, the conventional shields took them and dissipated the energy. Several simply ceased to register on sensors, their energy apparently vanishing at the point of contact with the ship's superposition field. And three of the incoming rounds, passed straight through the space the Erebus occupied and continued on their trajectories. Confirmed probability bypass, Yara said from her station, sounding like she was trying to contain excitement. 3 rounds passed through harmlessly. The ship's local quantum state rejected physical interaction. Damage? Minor shield strain on 2 sections. Nothing significant. On the tactical display, the 3 Tharkin ships paused. Chinwei could almost imagine what was happening on their bridges. The confusion, the instruments showing that some of their rounds had apparently hit nothing despite clearly being on target, the tactical officers trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what was supposed to be possible. They're adjusting formation, James said. Closing to half range. Now we return fire, Chinwei said. 1 torpedo each. Quantum collapsed on impact. Firing. 3 torpedoes left the Erebus, or rather, 3 quantum probability events left the Erebus, existing as pure superposition states as they traveled across the space between the ships. On the tactical display they appeared as faint shimmer traces, not the solid bright lines of conventional torpedoes. They could not be tracked by conventional targeting systems because conventional targeting systems tracked physical objects, and these objects were not currently physical. Each one arrived at its target and, at the moment of arrival, collapsed. Became real. Became real inside the shields of the 3 Tharkan ships. Not outside. Not impacting against the outer hull and being deflected or absorbed. Inside, in the space that the Tharkan commanders had presumably believed was protected by those shields. Because a quantum torpedo in superposition state did not interact with physical shields. It passed through them in its non-physical state and only became physical once the targeting system collapsed its wave function on the other side. The results were immediate and dramatic. All 3 Tharkan ships took direct internal hits. One of them, the one in the lead position, went dark immediately, all power signatures ceasing, the ship coasting on its last momentum. The other 2 registered massive damage but remained operational. Lead ship neutralized, James said, his voice still that quiet, precise calm. Ships 2 and 3 have sustained significant damage. Both are still maneuvering. The 2 remaining Tharkan ships did something that Chinwei had not entirely predicted. Instead of continuing their attack or retreating, they changed formation, abandoning the envelopment pattern and instead moving toward each other, closing the distance between them until they were practically running side by side. What are they doing? David Park asked. Priya Singh had it first. They're trying to create a target that's too large to hit with quantum torpedoes in superposition. If they're close enough together, the probability fields overlap and our targeting system might not be able to collapse the torpedo's wave function precisely on one ship without affecting the other. Can they do that? Chinwei asked James. James was running calculations. Unknown. The torpedo guidance system should still be able to discriminate between close targets, but at this range and this separation, there's a possibility of what the engineers call quantum bleed. The collapse might propagate to the second ship, reducing overall energy to both rather than full impact on one. They figured out our weapons limitation, David said quietly. They're good tacticians, Chinwei acknowledged. James, what do you recommend? James was quiet for 2 seconds, the silence of genuine thought. Conventional weapons. At this range, with our railgun systems, I can put rounds through both ships sequentially before they can reposition. Their shields can handle it, but they'll have to divert power to do so. While they're diverting power, he paused. I hit them with a quantum torpedo in the gap. Do it. The Erebus opened up with its conventional weapons banks, 12 railgun turrets firing simultaneously, putting a sustained hail of physical rounds into the 2 remaining Tharkan vessels. The rounds impacted, the shields flared, the Tharkan ships began the automatic process of shunting more power to defensive systems. And in the brief moment when their offensive systems were down, a single quantum torpedo crossed the space between them and collapsed, precisely in the engine space of the second Tharkan vessel. The ship stopped moving. The third ship, the only one still fully operational, held its position for 4 seconds. Chinwei watched it on the display. She could read the hesitation in that 4-second pause, could feel the tactical officer on the other ship calculating the same numbers she had calculated and arriving at the same conclusion. 3 ships. 1 neutralized completely. 2 disabled. No damage to the Erebus beyond minor shield strain. The third Tharkan ship turned. It ran. Should I pursue? James asked. No, Chinwei said immediately. Let it go. David looked at her. They'll report back. Whatever faction sent them will know their attack failed. I know. Chinwei kept her eyes on the display, watching the retreating ship grow smaller. I want them to report back. I want whoever sent them to understand exactly what happened here and exactly what it means. She paused. The third ship running is more useful to us than the third ship destroyed. A destroyed ship tells them nothing except that it didn't survive. A running ship tells them everything, including the thing I most want them to understand. Which is? Chinwei turned away from the display. That we don't need to destroy everything we fight. We're selective. We're controlled. We're not here to start a war. She paused. And that the next time they send ships against us, they should send more. The crew assessment of the battle, compiled by Yara within the hour, made for striking reading. Total duration of engagement, 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Incoming fire received, 87 rounds, varying types. Damage sustained, minor shield strain, 2 sections. 0 hull breaches. 0 casualties. Enemy ships neutralized or disabled, 3 out of 3. Rounds fired by the Erebus, 42 conventional, 3 quantum torpedoes. Chinwei read the numbers twice. Not because she doubted them, but because she wanted them to settle properly in her mind. 87 incoming rounds and 0 casualties. Not because they had been lucky. Because the ship had done exactly what Sophia Marsh had said it would do. When weapons struck, roughly a third of the time, the ship simply wasn't physically there to be struck. She thought about the engineers who had spent 40 years chasing this technology. She thought about the scientists who had told them, repeatedly and with confident academic authority, that it was impossible. She thought about what it meant for a species to decide that impossible was a starting point rather than a conclusion. Then she sent a secure transmission to Rachel Torres on Harmony. We've had contact. 3 Tharkan vessels. All neutralized. No casualties on our end. The clock is running, we need those names. She pressed send and leaned back in her command chair and let herself, for just a moment, feel the quiet satisfaction of a ship that had done what it was built to do. Then she started thinking about what came next. Rachel received Chinwei's message at 0900 hours and had a response from her anonymous source by midday. The source had been busy. The data package that came through was considerably larger than the first. Not a single sensor log, but a compilation of files, intercepts, financial records, and what appeared to be sections of a classified military planning document. Rachel spent 2 hours going through it with Marcus, both of them cross-referencing against the Council's public records and the intelligence reports that came across her desk as a senior ambassador. At the end of 2 hours, she had names. She sat back in her chair and looked at them, and felt something that was not quite surprise. She had been a diplomat long enough to have lost the capacity to be surprised by the capacity of people in power to do terrible things quietly, but was something deeper and colder than she had been expecting. 2 consensus member species. 2 council representatives who had sat in that chamber with her and looked her in the eyes. 2 species whose ships had been part of the peacekeeping forces that humanity had contributed to and benefited from and trusted. The Velshera. Or rather, a faction within the Velshera government. The military branch, specifically, a group of senior commanders who had been covertly supporting Tharkan operations in the Outer Reach for at least 12 years. The motive was complex. It involved Velshera strategic interests in a region of space adjacent to the Tharkan territory, resources that the growth of human colonies was beginning to threaten, and a calculation, apparently made at a sufficiently senior level to have survived internal review, that quietly allowing humanity's expansion to be checked was preferable to the diplomatic complications of confronting it openly. And the Keth. The mathematically precise, logically oriented Keth, whose representative had sat in the council chamber and accused humanity of technical violations of the Harmonic Accord. A group within the Keth government, smaller, more radical than the Velshera faction, but better funded, that had been providing the Tharkan operatives with intelligence data, human shipping routes, colony supply schedules, the navigational data that allowed Tharkan vessels to intercept human ships in the most isolated, most deniable locations. They had not been killing humans because they feared humanity. They had been killing humans because human expansion was inconvenient, and they had calculated that humans could be quietly removed from the equation before humanity became powerful enough to make the calculation expensive. They had miscalculated. "This is enough to take to the council," Marcus said when they'd finished reviewing the documents. "It's enough to show the council," Rachel said. "Whether it's enough to do anything within the council is a different question." "What do you mean?" She turned to look at him. Marcus was 34, sharp, and had been working with her long enough to understand the broad strokes of how the consensus worked. But there were some things that only decades of watching the machinery from the inside prepared you to understand. The Velshera and the Keth are both founding members of the consensus. They have been members for 600 and 900 years respectively. They have structural influence in the council that new members don't have. Any proceeding against them requires a supermajority, more than 30 of 47 votes. And some of those 47 members are going to look at the situation and decide that the political cost of formally sanctioning 2 founding members is higher than the cost of arranging a quiet resolution. "Meaning they let them off," Marcus said. "Meaning they apply pressure privately and arrange a cease and desist and nobody talks about it publicly and the families of 112 colonists on the Helena never find out what actually happened to their people." Rachel's voice was very even. "That is the political path of least resistance, and I want you to understand it exists before I tell you what I'm going to do instead." Marcus looked at her. I'm going to send this data package to Admiral Chen Wei, Rachel said. And I'm going to send it to the press. Both of them. At the same time. Marcus went very still. If you do that, if this goes public before the council has a chance to manage it, then they can't manage it. Yes. Rachel looked at the names on her screen. The Velshera faction commander. The Keth intelligence operative. The Tharkan operatives who had fired the weapons. 112 names from the Helena alone. She thought of them. She thought of all the others. The families of the dead deserve to know. And the consensus needs to be what it claims to be, or it needs to stop claiming it. She paused. I've been a diplomat for 40 years. I believe in the process. I believe that talking usually beats shooting, and that patience usually beats urgency, and that compromise is almost always better than confrontation. She met Marcus's eyes. But I also believe that there are moments when the process has failed, and the only thing left is the truth. Caro, do what must be done. This is that moment. She pressed send. Both messages went out simultaneously. The data package landed in Admiral Chen Wei's secure inbox 6 seconds before the first news syndicate in the galaxy picked it up and began broadcasting it. And the consensus, which had been built on consensus and compromise and the patient management of difficult truths, encountered a truth that could not be managed. The next 18 hours were unlike anything Rachel had experienced in 4 decades of diplomatic work. The press didn't just run the story, they detonated it. The data package was clean, unambiguous, and detailed enough that it left no meaningful room for alternative interpretation. The sensor logs from the monitoring buoy showed the Helena being destroyed. The intercepts showed Velshera and Keth involvement in providing support. The financial records showed 12 years of covert funding flowing from Velshera military accounts through a series of intermediaries to Tharkan paramilitary units. Within 4 hours, there were demonstrations outside consensus diplomatic facilities on 7 different planets. Within 8 hours, 3 human colony worlds had formally requested emergency status from the consensus and simultaneously informed the council that they were placing their defense postures on maximum alert. Within 12 hours, the Velshera Grand Council had issued a formal statement that was so carefully hedged with diplomatic qualifications that it essentially said nothing, and the Keth government had gone entirely silent, which was for the Keth even more alarming. And within 18 hours, Admiral Chen Wei received a second message. This one was not from Rachel. It was not from her anonymous source. It was broadcast on open military channels in clear text, intended for anyone and everyone to intercept. It was from the Tharkan faction commander, the one who had ordered the attacks. His name was Commander Velkath, and the message he broadcast was short. The vessel you call the Erebus is a violation of galactic law and a direct threat to the peace of the Outer Reach. It will be destroyed. The price for threatening the Tharkan people will be paid in full. This is your only warning. Attached to the message was a sensor overlay of the Erebus's current position, accurate to within approximately 200 kilometers. They had tracking data on the ship. Someone was feeding them tracking data on the ship. Chen Wei read the message and the attachment twice, then called her intelligence officer. Priya. Someone inside the consensus fleet network is feeding the Tharkan faction our position. I want to know how. I want to know who. And I want it in the next 3 hours. Admiral? 3 hours, Major. HFY, from this moment on, we treat this as a hostile intelligence penetration. Full countermeasures. Yes, ma'am. Priya paused. Admiral. The force he's putting together, based on the Tharkan military doctrine and the assets they have in the region, I estimate 8 to 12 void cutters. Possibly more. Chen Wei was quiet for a moment. 12 void cutters against the Erebus. Yes, ma'am. She thought about the 11-minute engagement that had neutralized 3. She thought about 98% operational systems. She thought about 700 crew members and a ship that wasn't entirely real. All right, she said. If they want to come, let them come. But I want that intelligence leak found before they get here. Because I intend to surprise them, and surprises require that they don't know exactly what we're doing. Priya Singh found the leak in 2 hours and 40 minutes. It was elegant in a way that made her furious. The kind of elegance that comes from someone very skilled doing something very wrong. The data stream was buried inside the Erebus's own sensor broadcasting system, piggybacking on the passive sensor emissions that every ship broadcast naturally as part of its navigation safety protocols. It was not transmitting anything the ship wasn't already broadcasting. It was simply relaying that information, position, velocity, power signature, to a secondary receiver, buried in the signal like a whisper inside a shout. The relay had been installed in the shipyard. Someone in the shipyard had planted it before they departed. I need a list of every person who had access to the sensor broadcasting system in the 48 hours before we left, Priya told her team. I don't care about clearances or seniority. Anyone who touched that system, physically or through the network. The list had 11 names. 8 of them were crew members who had been working on the sensor system as part of the normal departure preparations, easily confirmed through security logs and the physical work orders they'd signed. 2 more were engineering supervisors who had conducted oversight reviews. The 11th name was a civilian contractor. A software integration specialist from a firm that had a long-standing contract with the fleet. His name was Taran Vo. He had been on board for 30 hours during the pre-departure rush, and his current whereabouts were listed as departed vessel, cleared security, destination unknown. Priya looked at his file. Taran Vo had a perfectly clean record, excellent references, and a history of working on sensitive fleet projects. He had passed every security check. He had been given access to the sensor broadcasting system because he had the right credentials and someone had signed off on the work order and nobody had been paying quite close enough attention in the chaos of the accelerated departure. She pulled his financial records, which required a priority override authorization, which she got from Chen Wei in under 30 seconds, and found what she expected to find. A large payment, made through 4 intermediaries, originating from a financial account that her system flagged as associated with a Velshera military procurement office. They had been inside the ship before the ship ever left the dock. Ma'am, she reported to Chen Wei, we have a confirmed intelligence penetration. The relay has been disabled. Our position is no longer being transmitted. But they had approximately, she checked the timeline, approximately 22 hours of position data before we cut it off. Enough for them to have us located, Chen Wei said. Yes. And enough for them to have our course and velocity, which allows a predicted projection of our position. So cutting the relay helps us go dark, but they already know roughly where we are. Chen Wei thought for a moment. How accurate is their projected position likely to be? If they have good tacticians, very accurate. Maybe within 500 kilometers after 12 hours. After 24 hours, maybe 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers of drift from the projection, depending on our course changes. And how long until their fleet gets here? At estimated speed? 14 hours. 14 hours. Priya watched the admiral do the calculation, the accuracy of the enemy projection versus the time for the enemy fleet to arrive. She saw the moment Chen Wei made a decision. We're going to move, Chen Wei said. But not randomly. I want to move to a position that looks like the projection they'd calculate from the data they have, because I want them to think we're exactly where they expect us to be. She paused. And then I want the Erebus to go to full quantum dark. Full quantum dark was something the ship had never actually done in a real tactical situation. It meant pushing the quantum anchor to maximum, biasing the ship's presence in normal space down as far as it could go. Theoretical models suggested they could reduce physical presence to approximately 12%, meaning the ship would be physically real, and therefore detectable only about 1 in 8 moments. In that state, the ship was nearly impossible to locate. Its weapons could still fire. Projecting quantum torpedoes from a near-zero physical state was actually more effective, since the ship itself generated less interference, but its own sensors were significantly degraded. If we go full quantum dark, Priya said carefully, we'll have limited sensor awareness of the incoming fleet. We'll be shooting somewhat blind. Not completely blind, Chen Wei said. We'll have passive quantum sensor data. The quantum field interactions from their ships will still register even if conventional electromagnetic sensors are degraded. She looked at James Cole, who had been listening from his station. James. In full quantum dark, what's our effective sensor range? Passive quantum sensors give us about 60% of normal sensor range, James said. Better than nothing. And our targeting is based on quantum field interactions, not conventional electromagnetic targeting, so our weapon's accuracy is actually improved when we're firing from full dark. The quantum torpedoes have less local interference to navigate through. Better accuracy and a harder target, Chen Wei said. At the cost of reduced sensor range and limited ability to maneuver precisely. She nodded. We set the ambush. We let them come to the position they expect to find us. And when they arrive, they find a ship that is 12% physically real and shooting at them from superposition. Priya thought about 12 Tharkin void cutters arriving at what they believed was a known position, expecting to find a ship they had intelligence on and could target, and instead encountering a ship that was barely physically present and whose weapons were undetectable until they were already inside the enemy's shields. That, she said, is going to be a bad day for the Tharkin faction. That, Chinwei said, is the idea. The Erebus moved. It moved with the particular quiet of a ship that understood its own nature. Not a dramatic change of course, not a sudden burn of engines, but a careful, measured adjustment that took it to precisely the position that a good Tharkan tactician, working from 22 hours of position data, would calculate as the Erebus's most likely location in 14 hours. Then it stopped. And then it went dark. The quantum anchor pushed to maximum. The power readings on the bridge, which had always been slightly strange, slightly blurred, in a way that human eyes weren't entirely equipped to process, became stranger. The instruments showed the ship's physical presence dropping. 90%, 75, 50, 30, 20, 12. The world outside the viewports looked normal. Stars looked like stars. Space looked like space. But everything had a quality of unreality to it, a soft, dreamlike imprecision at the edges of things, and when crew members reached out to touch the walls of the ship, their hands felt a faint resistance that was not quite the solid certainty of normal matter. Quantum anchor at maximum, Yara confirmed. Physical presence at 11.8%. Conventional sensor output at 62% of normal. We're as dark as we get. Good, Chinwei said. Now we wait. The waiting was harder than the fighting. That was always true in Chinwei's experience. The fighting had adrenaline and decision-making and the constant demand of the moment to keep the mind occupied. The waiting had nothing but the weight of what was coming. She spent part of it walking the ship again. The crew knew what was happening. She had never believed in keeping crews ignorant of tactical situations, because informed people made better decisions and because being treated like an adult was worth more to morale than false reassurance. They knew 12 ships were coming. They knew the Erebus was the most advanced warship humanity had ever built. They knew both things simultaneously and were processing them in the way that humans process difficult things, with dark humor, with focused work, with small acts of care for each other. She found 2 crew members in the mess, playing cards, their game broadcast quietly on the section intercom channel so that other crew members who were at their stations could hear the familiar, comfortable sound. She found engineers in their spaces running and rerunning diagnostics that were already green, because running diagnostics was something to do with hands that wanted to be doing something. She found a medical officer in the sick bay, not because anyone was hurt, but because she had arranged the space carefully and methodically and wanted it to be ready. In the engineering section, she found Sophia Marsh sitting on the floor with her back against the quantum drive housing, and Sophia looked up when Chinwei appeared and said without preamble, "Do you know what I think about when I think about this ship?" "Tell me," Chinwei said, sitting on the floor beside her. "My grandmother was a physicist," Sophia said. She spent her whole career working on quantum coherence. She spent 30 years being told it was impossible at macroscopic scale. She died 12 years ago before we figured it out. She was quiet for a moment. I got into this field because of her. I wanted to finish what she started. When we finally cracked the quantum anchor, when the coherence held at macroscopic scale for the first time, I sat in the lab and I cried for about an hour and I kept thinking, she would have loved this. She would have thought it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Chinwei was quiet. "I just want to make sure it matters," Sophia said. "All of it. Her work and my work and everyone's work. I want it to matter." "It already matters," Chinwei said. "The 312 people whose ships were attacked and who are alive right now because the Erebus changed the calculation. It matters to them." She paused. "And it's going to matter to a lot more people before this is over." Sophia nodded slowly. "Don't let them destroy it." "I have no intention of that," Chinwei said. She stood up and walked back to the bridge. 12 hours later, the Tharkan fleet arrived. They came out of dark space in a spread formation, not the envelopment pattern the previous 3 ships had used, but something more sophisticated. A layered approach, for ships in the outer ring, for in the middle distance, for in close reserve. It was a formation designed for sustained engagement, not a quick strike. It was designed to maintain constant pressure from multiple directions while the reserve rotated in as forward units needed to withdraw. It was a formation that assumed the target would behave like a normal ship. Chinwei watched them appear on the quantum sensor display, blurry at the edges, less precise than conventional sensors but present, and counted them. 12 as projected. Void cutters as projected. Moving in exactly the formation Priya had anticipated. "They're at the projected position," James said quietly. "They think they know where we are." "Give them a moment," Chinwei said. On the display, she watched the Tharkan fleet's initial maneuvering, the careful, systematic approach of a force that thought it was hunting a specific target in a specific location. She watched their weapon systems power up. She watched their scanning arrays sweep the space ahead of them. scanning for a ship that was 11.8% physically real. They wouldn't find it. Not with conventional scans. Not from that distance. The Erebus was essentially invisible. On the Tharkan fleet's command ship, the largest of the 12, positioned in the inner reserve ring, she imagined a commander looking at his sensor returns and finding nothing, and beginning to wonder whether the projected position was accurate. "They're scanning," Priya confirmed. "Electromagnetic and gravitational. No quantum scanning capability." She paused. "They can't see us." "Good." Chinwei looked at the display. "James. 12 ships. Priority targets. The command ship in the reserve ring. If we take out command and control, the fleet's coordination degrades significantly. After that, the 4 outer ring ships, they're the first line of attack. If we suppress them, the formation loses its outer layer and has to collapse inward, which reduces their tactical options. Command ship first, then outer ring. 2 quantum torpedoes per target, maximum collapse bias." She looked at Yara. "On my mark, we transition from full dark to combat operational, push physical presence up to 40%. Enough to fire effectively, not enough to be easy to hit." "Ready," Yara said. "Mark." The Erebus shifted. In the Tharkan fleet, every sensor array would have registered it simultaneously. The sudden appearance, out of nowhere, of a massive quantum signature, 11.8% physically real one moment and 38% the next, appearing in the space where nothing had been a moment before. The Erebus fired. 2 quantum torpedoes for the command ship, existing in superposition as they crossed the distance and collapsing precisely inside the command bridge. 2 for the nearest outer ring ship. The firing sequence took 4 seconds. Before the Tharkan fleet could react, before the 4 seconds were even up, Chinwei said, "Back to full dark." The physical presence dropped back to 12%. The Tharkan fleet, which had been in the process of targeting a threat that had appeared suddenly and was now trying to find that threat again, encountered the particular frustration of trying to fight something that was almost not there. The 2 torpedoes hit the command ship. The command ship went silent. The first outer ring ship took a direct hit and lost propulsion. The remaining 11 ships opened fire, but they were firing at the ghost of a ship, at a sensor return that kept flickering in and out of resolution, at a target that their targeting systems couldn't definitively lock because the target wasn't definitively present. 37 rounds hit the Erebus in the first volley. 22 of them passed through harmlessly, the ship simply not being physically real enough at that moment for them to interact with. 8 struck the quantum field and were partially dissipated. 7 hit conventional shields and were absorbed. Damage reports: shield strain on 4 sections. 1 hull section showing minor stress. 0 casualties. "Remarkable," David said very quietly. "We're not done," Chinwei said. "James, outer ring, 3 and 4. The Erebus flickered up to combat presence, fired 4 torpedoes in 3 seconds, dropped back to full dark. 2 more outer ring ships went silent. The Tharkan fleet began to break formation. What happened next was, Chinwei thought afterward, not a battle in the conventional sense. It was something closer to a systematic demonstration. The Erebus had 11 ships remaining against its 1, and those 11 ships were good, well-crewed, well-armed, tactically sophisticated. They adapted quickly to the quantum presence flickering, they began firing on predictive trajectories rather than targeting directly, they tried coordinated volley fire to put enough rounds in enough places that some of them would hit no matter where the Erebus was at any given moment. They were everything an enemy should be. They were simply fighting a ship that operated by different rules. Every time the Erebus came up to combat presence to fire, it stayed for 4 to 8 seconds maximum before dropping back into full dark. During those 4 to 8 seconds it took fire, some of it got through, and it returned fire that could not be defended against. Every cycle, another Tharkan ship went dark or lost critical systems. 9 minutes into the engagement, 5 ships neutralized, 6 remaining. 17 minutes, 8 ships neutralized, 4 remaining. At 22 minutes, with 3 ships left and the 4th in the process of losing its drive systems, something happened that Chinwei had not anticipated. The 3 remaining ships stopped. They powered down their weapons. On the open communication channel, not the tactical frequency, the open channel, a voice said, "This is Commander Velrath commanding the Tharkan vessel Perseverance. We are requesting cessation of hostilities. We are lowering weapons." Chinwei looked at the display. 3 ships, all showing reduced power readings. Weapons offline. "They're surrendering," James said. Chinwei looked at the 3 ships for a moment. She thought about 112 colonists on the Helena. She thought about the 8 other confirmed incidents. She thought about Velkatha's broadcast message, the price will be paid in full, and the certainty behind it. She also thought about what it meant to be the most powerful ship in the known galaxy and what you did with that power. She thought about what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of species watching to see whether humanity was the kind of species that destroyed or the kind that chose. Open a channel, she said. Channel open, Torres said. Commander Velrath, Chinwei said. This is Admiral Chinwei of the UES Erebus. Your surrender is accepted. You will maintain weapons offline and hold position. A human diplomatic team will come to you. You will be treated in accordance with consensus prisoner protocols. No harm will come to your crew. She paused. And you will tell us everything you know about the operations your faction has conducted against human shipping in the Outer Reach. Everything. Names, dates, locations. All of it. HFY. From this moment on, the accounting begins. A long silence on the channel. Then, understood, Admiral. We will cooperate. The final tally of the engagement. Duration, 26 minutes. Enemy ships, 12. Neutralized, 9. Surrendered, 3. Crew killed on enemy ships, 34, later confirmed by Velratha's accounting. Crew injured on enemy ships, 91. Damage to the Erebus. Moderate shield strain, 2 sections requiring repair, 1 hull stress point requiring inspection. Casualties on the Erebus, 0. Chinwei sat in her command chair for a long time after the engagement ended and looked at that number. 0. Not because they had been lucky. Not because the enemy had been weak. Because her crew had built something impossible and then had the skill and the steadiness to use it the way it needed to be used. She thought she should feel triumphant. What she actually felt was tired and grateful, and very aware that this was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of what came after, the harder work, the slower work, the work that didn't have the clarity of a battle with a defined winner and loser but instead had the murky, complicated weight of justice trying to make itself real in a galaxy that was much messier than a tactical display. She thought about Sophia Marsh's grandmother. About 30 years of being told something was impossible. Communications, she said. Get me Ambassador Torres. Rachel Torres was in the council chamber when the news came through. She was there for the 3rd emergency session in 2 days. The council was in something close to institutional panic, which expressed itself in this body as an extraordinary amount of formal procedure, because when everything was uncertain, process was the anchor that kept 47 species from simply screaming at each other. 3 different working groups had been established to review the evidence package she'd released. A formal inquiry had been opened into the Velshera faction. The Keth government had finally broken its silence, issuing a statement that used a great many words to say very little but that contained, buried in the 4th paragraph, the word regrettable, which the Keth cultural experts in Rachel's team said was the closest their language had to an admission of fault. The news from the Erebus engagement hit the council mid-session. 12 Tharkan warships. 1 human warship. Duration 26 minutes. Human casualties, 0. Rachel watched the information land across 47 alien faces, in all the different ways that different species had of showing shock, and she thought about what this moment was going to mean for the next 100 years. The Velshera Grand Counselor, a different representative from the one who had presided at the previous session, because the previous one had resigned in the 8 hours since Rachel's data release, asked very quietly, the weapons passed through their shields. Yes, Rachel said. That is how the quantum torpedo system works. And there is no known defense. Not currently. No. The silence in the chamber was immense. Ambassador Torres, said the Grath representative, the same one from before who had asked about humanity's intentions. 300 years ago, when your species first reached the stars, the consensus among the older members of this body was that humanity was interesting but ultimately not exceptional. That you would follow the same path all species follow. That you would be manageable. Yes, Rachel said. I've read the historical assessments. They were wrong. Yes. We have been systematically wrong about humanity for 3 centuries. The Gratha's subsonic rumble carried something that the translator rendered as a complex word meaning something like reckoning or accounting. And we have allowed, through negligence, through political convenience, through the particular moral cowardice of looking away from inconvenient truths, we have allowed your people to be killed. By our inaction if not by our hands. Rachel kept her face neutral. But she felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tight for 15 years. Yes, she said. What does your species want? The Grath asked. Not what you want from the Erebus, what you want from us. From this institution. Rachel had been preparing for this question since she'd pressed send on that data release. She had a prepared statement, carefully worded, balanced, diplomatic. She set it aside. Accountability, she said. Not performance. Not process. Real accountability, names attached to decisions, consequences attached to those decisions, and a record that exists and can be cited the next time someone decides that the inconvenience of humanity's growth is worth the lives of our colonists. She looked around the ring. We are not looking for war reparations. We are not looking to punish species. We are looking for what every civilization in this room claims to believe in: justice. Applied consistently. Applied to the powerful the same way it's applied to the weak. She paused. And we want the investigations finished. Properly. Within 1 year. All of them. With findings that are made public. And if we do not? This from Zoe, the Keth representative. Their voice was stripped of its usual mathematical precision. They sounded tired, which was a kind of honesty that Rachel had not heard from a Keth before. Then we will pursue justice through other means, Rachel said. We are very patient. And as you have now observed, we are very capable. She let that land without further embellishment. While Rachel was speaking to the council, Chinwei was speaking to Velrath. The Tharkan commander had been transported to the Erebus under the prisoner protocols, treated correctly, fed, given rest. He was a spare, angular being with gray skin and eyes that were a deep amber color, and he sat across from Chinwei in the briefing room with the particular stillness of someone who had decided to stop fighting. You knew the technology, Chinwei said. You knew what you were sending those ships against. We knew the reported capabilities, Velrath said. His translator gave him an accent that reminded Chinwei, oddly, of someone she'd known in graduate school. Our analysts assessed that the reports were exaggerated. Human technologists he stopped. Tend to overstate their capabilities? Chinwei said. Yes. Were you wrong about other human technologists or just this one? Velrath looked at his hands. It appears we have been wrong about human technologists generally for some time. Chinwei studied him. He was not what she had expected, not the raging ideologue the faction's rhetoric would have suggested, not the cold strategic calculator of the intelligence assessments. He looked like what he was, a military officer who had followed orders for a long time without asking enough of the questions he should have asked. The Helena, she said. 112 people. Families. Children. Your faction ordered that. Velrath was quiet for a long moment. I did not order it personally. I was aware of the operation. How many were you personally aware of? He told her. She listened to him go through them, each operation, the name of the vessel, the date, the number of people, the tactical justification his faction had used. She listened without interrupting because this accounting needed to be complete and it needed to be in his own words, not filtered through her questions. When he was done there was a silence. Why? Chinwei said finally. Not the strategic justification. The real reason. Why did your people decide that the answer was to kill colonists? Velrath looked at her with those amber eyes. Because they were far away, he said at last. And because they were not powerful enough to make the killing expensive. And because we believed they would remain that way. He paused. We were wrong. Yes, Chinwei said. You were. She stood. You'll give a full accounting to the consensus inquiry team when they arrive. Every operation. Every name. Every order and who gave it. She looked at him. If you do that, completely, honestly, I will advocate for the inquiry to make a distinction between those who ordered these operations and those who carried them out. I make no promises about the outcome. I make no promises about what the council will decide. But I will make that case. Velrath looked at her with an expression that was difficult to read. Then he said, Your species confuses me, Admiral. You build a ship that can destroy any fleet we send against you, and then you offer the enemy commander a path to something other than destruction. We built this ship so that we'd never have to use it that way, Chinwei said. The point was never to destroy everything. The point was to make it clear that we could, and that there were better options. In the aftermath the galaxy changed. Not all at once, it never did. Not in a single dramatic moment of revelation where everything was suddenly different. It changed the way real things change, which is slowly and then quickly and then slowly again, in a process that takes years to fully understand but that has a clear before and after. The consensus inquiry opened. Not the kind that got quietly buried, the kind with full council oversight, independent investigators from 12 member species, and a mandate that included public reporting. The Velshera faction leaders were named. The Keth intelligence operatives were named. The Tharkan commanders were named. For the first time in the history of the consensus, founding member species faced formal accountability proceedings, and the proceedings moved forward because the political calculation had changed. Because suddenly, voting to protect the powerful at the expense of the truth had a price that 47 species were watching and would remember. The families of the Helena colonists were told what had happened. All of the families of all the lost ships. The information was given to them carefully, with support, with the acknowledgement that no explanation and no accountability would give them back what they had lost. Some of them were angry. Some of them were devastated in a way that went beyond anger. Some of them, in the strange human way, were grateful. Grateful to finally know, to no longer be held in the suspension of uncertainty. Grateful not because it was enough, but because it was true. Rachel Torres was invited to address the council one more time, 3 months after the Erebus engagement. She gave a speech that was more personal than any she had ever given in that chamber, about her grandfather who had been on one of the first human colony ships, who had told her stories of what it felt like to look at an alien sky for the first time and feel the size of the universe. About what humanity had wanted coming to the stars, which was not conquest or dominance but connection. About what it cost to build trust and how quickly it could be broken and how slowly it rebuilt. She ended with a sentence that traveled far beyond the council chamber. The galaxy is not ours alone, and we have never believed it was. What we have believed, what we have always believed, is that the cost of claiming space in it should be the same for everyone. HFY, from this moment on, we ask only to be held to the same standard we hold ourselves to. No more. And no less. The speech was broadcast to 63 inhabited systems. It was translated into 49 languages. A number of diplomatic historians later cited it as the moment that the terms of humanity's relationship with the consensus formally changed, not just politically but conceptually, in the way that the galaxy thought about what humans were and what they were capable of and what they wanted. Chinwei took the Erebus back to the outer reach. Not to fight. To show the flag, as the old naval phrase went, to be present, visibly and undeniably present, in the region where human colonists lived and worked and built things. To make the implicit statement explicit. We are here and we will be here, and if you think about doing what some did before, Caro, do this calculation first. She stopped at every human colony within range. She let colonists come aboard, carefully in organized groups, and see the ship that had changed the calculation. She sat in mess halls and recreation areas and answered questions until she was hoarse. She let Danny Reeves show a group of 12-year-old colonists from a station called New Providence the relay coupling that he and the Admiral had fixed together in a maintenance crawlway at 0200 hours, and she watched those 12-year-olds look at a 22-year-old ensign who had helped solve a quantum coherence problem and helped defend a ship against a fleet of 12, and she thought about what they were taking away from that moment. The idea that it was possible. That you could sit in a crawlway at 0200 hours with a problem you couldn't solve and a ship that shouldn't exist and find the solution. That the walls that everyone said couldn't be crossed were sometimes just walls, and walls had doors. Dr. Sophia Marsh submitted a paper. It was titled Macroscopic Quantum Coherence Maintenance via Anchored Probability Fields, an experimental report, and it described in full technical detail exactly how the quantum anchor worked. She did not name it after herself, though she had every right to. She named it after her grandmother, the Dr. Eleanor Marsh Coherence Sustained Field. The paper landed in the scientific community like a stone in a still pond. The ripples went in every direction simultaneously. Within 6 months, 13 different research institutions across the consensus were working on replicating the result. 3 Velshera research teams, 2 Keth for human, 1 Dothiki, 1 Graph, and 2 joint human-alien collaborations. Some of them were working on peaceful applications. Quantum coherence at macroscopic scale had implications for computing, for medicine, for energy generation, for materials science. Some of them were working on military applications, which was inevitable and which Sophia and Chinwei and Rachel all understood could not be stopped, only shaped. The consensus, with some difficulty and some genuine political effort from Rachel's team, established a joint technology governance framework. Not the old harmonic accord, which had clearly failed in its mandate. A new one with stronger enforcement mechanisms, with transparency requirements, and with a clause that had been quietly fought over for 3 weeks before it passed. A requirement that any technology developed with military applications be reviewed by a joint human consensus council before deployment. Humanity accepted this. Not without debate. There was significant domestic debate, fierce in some quarters, about whether accepting consensus oversight was worth the trade. Chinwei testified at 2 legislative hearings. Rachel testified at 4. The argument they both made, separately and in their own ways, was the same. The point of building the Erebus had never been to stand alone. The point had been to earn the right to stand equal. And equals participate in governance. It passed. Velrath was tried. So were his commanders and the Velshera faction leaders and the Keth intelligence operatives. The trials were long and difficult and produced outcomes that satisfied no one entirely, which Rachel said was a characteristic sign that the proceedings were actually fair. The Velshera faction leaders received formal censure and were stripped of their military positions. The Keth operatives were convicted of intelligence crimes. The Tharkan commanders received the harshest sentences, formal recognition of crimes against sentient beings under consensus law. Velrath, who had cooperated fully, received a reduced sentence. He was assigned to a joint reparations program, 10 years of work, under consensus oversight, contributing to the rebuilding of human colony infrastructure in the Outer Reach. He approached this assignment with what Rachel described, after meeting him twice, as grim but genuine commitment. She found this, in the complicated human way, quietly hopeful. 6 months after the Erebus engagement, Admiral Chen Wei stood alone on the observation deck of the ship and looked at the stars. She did this sometimes when the work was quiet and the crew was running through their routines without needing her, and the galaxy seemed, for a moment, to be holding its breath between one crisis and the next. She stood in the dark with the stars spread out in front of her and thought about what it meant to be here, in this ship, in this moment, in this life. She was 53 years old. She had spent her adult life in uniform. She had seen war and peace and the unglamorous grinding territory between them. She had watched the human species arrive in the galaxy as newcomers, uncertain and full of ambition, and she had watched them spend 3 centuries proving themselves by the only standard available to them, the standard they set for themselves because no one else was setting it for them. She thought about the things she had been afraid of along the way. She had been afraid, when the Erebus was first explained to her, that she was being handed a weapon too powerful for anyone to wield responsibly. She had been afraid that the power of the ship would change the character of its use, that the ability to win would become, inevitably, the habit of destroying. She had watched other species and other human commanders fall into that pattern. The logic was seductive. If you could destroy anything, why not destroy what threatened you? Why not be safe, completely, permanently, by eliminating every possible threat? But she had held on to a different idea. She had held on to it through the engagement with 3 ships and the engagement with 12 ships and through the political battles that came after. The idea was simple, almost embarrassingly simple, the kind of idea that got written on plaques and quoted at graduation ceremonies and got so familiar from repetition that it sometimes lost the actual weight of what it meant. Power was not the point. What you did with it was the point. The Erebus existed so that 12 Tharkan ships could come at one human ship and find that the calculation didn't work. So that the faction within the Velshera military that had decided humans were manageable would be forced to recalculate. So that for the families of the Helena, there was finally an accounting. Not a comfortable one, not a sufficient one, but a real one, attached to real names and real consequences. The Erebus existed so that the next time someone looked at the map and saw a human colony and began calculating whether the removal of those colonists would be politically expensive, the answer would be, yes. Infinitely, unacceptably expensive. Because humanity was not what they had been 15 years ago, not what they had been 50 years ago. They had learned, the way all species in the galaxy eventually learned, that survival required capability, and that capability, used correctly, was the thing that made peace possible in a universe that did not run on good intentions alone. She thought about her mother, who had been a schoolteacher in Shanghai, who had taught her that the most important thing a person could do was understand a problem clearly before deciding what to do about it. She thought about her mother's hands, grading papers at the kitchen table, patient and precise. She thought about what her mother would make of where those teachings had led. She thought she might approve. She hoped so. The door to the observation deck opened. Sophia Marsh came in, carrying 2 cups of something that smelled like coffee but was, Chen Wei knew, the elaborate engineered beverage that Sophia had been subsisting on for the past 3 months, which contained enough stimulants to power a small vehicle. You should be sleeping, Chen Wei said. You should also be sleeping, Sophia said, and handed her one of the cups. We both should be. Here we are. They stood side by side in the dark and drank their not-quite coffee and looked at the stars. The paper is getting traction, Sophia said. The Dothiki team in particular, they're about 6 months behind us on the theoretical groundwork, but they're brilliant. They're going to contribute things we didn't think of. There are going to be papers coming out of this that I'm going to be reading and going, how did I not see that? Good, Chen Wei said. That's how it should work. We changed things, Sophia said quietly. Not as a boast, just as a statement. Yes, Chen Wei said. We did. The question is what things we changed them into. Sophia looked at the stars. You think it lasts? The inquiry, the new framework, all of it? Chinwei was quiet for a moment. I think it lasts as long as we make it last, she said. I think nothing good in the universe runs on its own momentum. Somebody has to keep pushing. Somebody has to keep paying attention. She paused. But I also think, the fact that 47 species had to sit in that chamber and hear a full accounting of what was done and vote on consequences in front of the galaxy, that creates a reference point. Something they can be held to. Something that makes the next time harder for the people who want to look away. Reference points, Sophia said. Is that what history is? Just reference points? It's what useful history is, Chinwei said. History that just repeats itself without being learned from isn't useful. History that gives you something to point at. This happened, this is what it cost, this is what we chose. That's the kind that actually does something. She looked at the stars and thought, we are adding a reference point right now. This moment. The ship. These choices. The galaxy will remember. 3 weeks later, something happened that nobody had predicted. A message came in, not from the consensus, not from the Tharkan faction, not from any of the parties currently engaged in the diplomatic and legal process. From the outer reach, from a point in space that no registry identified as having any inhabitant or installation. A new signal. A new species. They had been listening apparently for some time. They had been watching what humanity did with the Erebus. They had been watching, they said, in a communication that took 3 weeks to partially decode and that was still only about 40% understood. Watching not with fear and not with aggression, but with something that the translation team, after considerable debate, rendered as cautious recognition. They were called, as best the linguists could make out, something that sounded in their own language like a chord more than a name. The translation team called them the Resonance. They were not a threat. They were not an ally yet. They were something the galaxy had not had in 200 years. A new voice. And they had chosen to speak to humanity first. Rachel Torres sat in her office on Harmony and read the partial translation of the resonant message 3 times. Then she called Chinwei. Did you see it? She said. I saw it, Chinwei said. They chose us first. Yes. Because of what we did with the Erebus, Rachel said. Not a question. Because of what we did and what we didn't do. Because we won and chose not to destroy everything we'd beaten, Chinwei said. Because we had the power to do worse and did better. I think, if I understand what 40% of a first contact message can convey, I think that's exactly what they're saying. They've been watching to see what kind of species we were. And they decided, based on what they saw, that we were the kind of species worth talking to. Rachel sat with that for a moment. Then she laughed. A genuine, full laugh, surprised out of her, the kind that comes when something is both unexpected and exactly right. We built a ship that broke physics, she said, and what it proved was that we were trustworthy. That was the point, Chinwei said. Was it? It was always the point, Chinwei said. The ship was just how we proved it.